Old Grognard says, let's look at how rings work in 2nd edition AD&D. Hello, and welcome to the channel. Let's get today's video started by looking at the first paragraph of the rings section on page 147 of the DMG. All magical rings normally radiate magic, but most are impossible to detect as magical rings without some mystic means. Furthermore, all magical rings look alike, so determination of a given ring's magical powers is difficult. The ring must be put on and various things tried in order to find out what it does. No ring radiates good or evil. Let's dissect this paragraph a bit. I think a reasonable interpretation of this first part here is that most of the time you can't tell if a ring is magical just by looking at it. You usually have to use detect magic or some other magical means to know whether or not a ring is magical. This next part I take to mean that a ring's appearance has little to nothing to do with its magical properties. Not necessarily that they all literally look the same, because like most everything else in 2nd edition, there are going to be exceptions. An example is the Ring of the Ram, which has a very specific physical description. If you go and look, I'm sure you can find other examples of this, so just keep in mind that while these statements are generally true, there are always going to be some exceptions. Next, we get to this part about determining what a ring's powers are. You can do this the way it says here, but cursed items do exist, so you might not want to do it that way. Fortunately, there are other ways to figure this out. The players could use the Identify spell or some other form of divination, and if the DM allows it, there might be folks who you can just pay to figure this out for you as well. So now that we have an idea of how to figure out what a ring is and what it does, what are the rules for using rings in game? Unlike other magic items we've looked at so far, rings have to be worn in order for a character to use them. On page 147, it covers how this works. No more than 2 magical rings can be worn by a character at the same time. If more are worn, none will function. No more than 1 magical ring can be worn on the same hand. A second ring worn on one hand causes both to be useless. Rings must be worn on the fingers. Rings on toes, in earlobes, etc. do not function as magical rings. That paragraph does a pretty good job of telling us what we need to know. I don't think we need to dissect it or clarify anything. Let's move on. Rings generally don't have restrictions based on character class or race unless the ring's description says otherwise. Because of this, it's totally within the rules for the DM to allow humanoid monsters to use rings as long as they have hands and fingers. Because of this, if a ring is part of a treasure, there's a good chance it will be used against the party. As for adjudicating the magical effects a ring has, rings generally just do whatever their description says they do. However, there are a few default characteristics that rings have if their description doesn't say otherwise. A ring's spell-like effects function as a 12th level caster. If the spell would require a caster of higher than 12th level to cast, then it functions as the lowest level necessary for the spell to function. If you're using individual initiative with speed factors and casting times and all that fun stuff, rings have an initiative modifier of +3. Sometimes there are exceptions to this, and they will be listed in the ring's description. An example of this is the Ring of Elemental Command, where the ring's additional powers have an initiative modifier of +5. As far as ring use and movement are concerned, the game doesn't explicitly state if or how far a character can move when using a ring. I count it as a half move action, but some folks count it as a no move action. In other words, how this works is up to the DM. If you want to know more about how movement in general works in this game, I have a video for that, and the link is in this video's description and also in the end cards. Overall, I would say that the key to adjudicating how a magical ring works is just to read the description and work from there. If you're rolling for treasure and get a ring you aren't comfortable with, either because of its power level or because how it works doesn't make sense, it's perfectly acceptable to substitute it for something else. I know I've said this more than once in these videos, but it's worth repeating. The treasure tables in this game are basically a suggestion generator. What treasure you give out is ultimately up to you. If you want to know more about how treasure in general works in this game, once again, I have a video for that, and the link is also in the end cards and description. Alright, that pretty much covers how magical rings work in 2nd edition AD&D. If you have any questions or cool magical ring related stories, please share in the comments. If you find this video useful, please leave a like, a comment, or share it with someone else who might find it useful. Thanks for watching. Jimbo the Wizard and I would like to wish you a wonderful rest of your day.